When Pastor Gina asked me to preach these 3 Sundays, and I saw that this was Good Shepherd Sunday, or the I Am the Good Shepherd, I was excited because I love talking about sheep. I just really love sheep. I don't know a lot about sheep. Like, I know just enough to be dangerous, but I really have always loved them. I learned the hard way, though, just how vulnerable sheep can be and how difficult it can be to protect them from harm. Shepherding requires a relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. A shepherd must know and love the sheep, and the sheep must know and trust the shepherd. And without that trusting relationship, sheep will neither listen nor follow the one who would lead them. Sheep without a shepherd are in grave danger. I learned this late in the 80s when I was the director of a church camp, which is called Klein Ranch. That is in northwestern South Dakota. And it was started, there was an older Lutheran couple that had no children. They were ranchers. And so when they got into their older years, they gave a lot to the Lutheran church. And one of the things they gave was their ranch to turn into a church camp. And it was mostly a horseback riding camp. But we also tried to create a ranch experience for the kids that would come out to that camp. And so we would teach them a little bit about stewardship of the land. They could do some gardening. And we would give them an opportunity, if we could find some ranchers in the area who would trust us with a few calves or lambs, we'd give them an opportunity to help raise them throughout the summer and then return the animals to the ranchers at the end of the summer. Well, there was a beautiful woman who was a good Lutheran woman who was a shepherd. She raised sheep. And so she would allow us to raise 2 little lambs every summer. So I chose Amy, who was a city girl, who was on staff, one of the counselors. I thought she would be a good one to put in charge of the 2 little lambs, that she would learn a lot from that experience and would help guide the campers. And so during the week of staff orientation, she and I drove out to this woman's ranch and met her and walked with her out to the sheep pasture. And as soon as the sheep saw her, they all just came running pell-mell. You could see, immediately you could see the love between that shepherd and her sheep. I'd never seen anything quite like that before. And she called each one by name, and she would pat them on the head and ask them how their day was. She really had a relationship with them. And then she chose 2 of the lambs who were the boldest and the bravest and the strongest, maybe just a little bigger than the others, and chose those 2 to go with us back to camp. And first she picked up one of them, and of course she called it by name, and she picked it up, and she held it in her arms. And she talked to that little lamb. And she talked so gently. She said, look, I love you so much, but I'm going to let you go away this summer. I'm going to let you go to a camp, and you're going to meet a lot of young people. They're going to pet you, and they're going to love you. And at the end of the summer, you'll come back, and you'll see me again, and you're going to be okay. And she took that lamb, and she handed it to Amy. Then she picked up another little lamb, and she talked to it the same way, and she comforted and assured it, and she handed it to me. And then she gave us some final instructions, especially how to care for them and what to feed them, and instructed us that we were to stop at the feed mill in town to get their food for the summer. And so that's what we did. Amy and I proceeded to the feed mill. Now, I'd been in a feed mill a few times with my great-great-grandpa, and so I went, actually my great-grandpa, wow, not my great-great, but with my great-grandpa back when he was raising cattle. So I kind of knew a feed mill, although I'm sure I looked a little out of place. Amy had probably never even been in a town with a feed mill before, so she looked way out of place. And while we were sitting there, an older rancher came in, very distinguished looking, and he sat down beside us and immediately noticed that we weren't regulars and asked us what we were doing there. So we told him our story about the 2 little lambs that we had, out in the vehicle, and we were getting them some feed. And he'd heard of our camp. It had a good reputation. And he said, oh, wow. He said, I'll tell you what. You can raise 2 of my calves this summer. Wow. I mean, how awesome. I think it was a good deal for him, too, and a good deal for us. It was like, yes. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll bring 2 of them out this evening. And I said, well, my only worry is that, we only have the one pen. I mean, I don't know, do calves and lambs mix until we can? He said, well, I think you should build, a separation between them. And we could do that. But he said, for now, for a couple days, they'll be okay. So that night he drove up, and he brought his 2 little calves out. Oh, they were so darling. And we opened the pen to put them in, and what happens? Those 2 little lambs ran out pell-mell. They bolted, and they headed out. And so Amy, she's in charge of them, so she takes off after them along with another real city boy named Nate that was on staff. And just out of sheer luck, they caught one of them in the yard. But the other was faster, and it headed down the lane. And it started to run down the lane. It had to cross a highway now out in South Dakota. A highway in that part of South Dakota means like a car might come by every 15 minutes, maybe, on a busy day. So that wasn't as big a worry. But it continued to head down the lane to a pasture where one of the ranchers had their cattle. In fact, they had cows with their baby calves, right? And if any of you know anything about cows with their calves, they can be kind of protective. And so all this was happening unbeknownst to us. I thought Amy and Nate would figure out that if they stopped chasing the lamb, it would stop running, but I was wrong. They didn't figure that out. They kept chasing it. And so unbeknownst to us, we're getting these little calves settled in the pen. And next thing we know, back come Amy and Nate with tears streaming down their cheeks. The little lamb had run into the pasture with the cows and their calves. And the cows, being protected, perceived it to be a danger and trampled it, while Amy and Nate looked on helplessly. Wisely, they did not go into the pasture, and that was a good thing. But they came back just, Amy's feeling like a total failure, and we're all devastated. So the rancher drove us back out by the pasture, and we looked and we saw it was too late. There was nothing that we could do for that lamb, but we knew that, because he told us, that it wasn't safe to go in just at that moment, that we needed to wait until the cattle moved on to go in and take care of things. So there was nothing else we could do except grieve this beautiful little lamb. And being the director, I had to do the really hard thing, which was I had to call the shepherd and tell her that in one day's time, we had already lost one of her 2 little lambs. And I could tell on the other end of the phone that she was grief-stricken, but immediately she offered us another lamb. And the reason she did that was because she was most concerned, and probably not as much about us, but she was concerned about the little lamb we still had with us. And she didn't want it to be alone. She knew now it was terribly frightened and all by itself. And so she wanted to be certain that she brought some company for it, that it would have another lamb to be with. Ever since that summer that I experienced that true shepherd, I hear this gospel about Jesus, and I picture her. I picture what it means to be a shepherd, that relationship between the sheep and the shepherd. How the shepherd knows each lamb intimately. I envision those sheep running to her the way that they did as soon as they saw her. And how when they came near, she knew each one by name, and she spoke to each one, and she knew their personalities. She knew so much about them. And how she picked each one up and held it close to her and spoke words of comfort and encouragement. I suspect that tragedy would never have occurred if the true shepherd had been there. The lambs would have come to her if she called to them, and if they were scared and ran out of the pen like they did, she would have coaxed them back gently. She would have waited for them. She would not have run them down because she knew better. She knew them so well. But if they had kept running, if that one little lamb had gotten all the way to that pasture, if she had been in Amy's shoes and Nate's shoes and had been standing there watching that lamb cross over into the pasture and head toward danger, I wonder, would she have gone after it? Would she have risked being trampled by those cattle as well? Would she have risked her own life for one little lamb? I don't know. I really don't know what she would have done. I kind of suspect maybe she would have. I don't know. But I do know this. I know what Jesus would do. Jesus is the shepherd who would go straight over the fence and march right into that herd of cattle to save even one helpless little lamb. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Not so with the hired hand. The hired hand sees danger coming and he runs away and lets the sheep fend for themselves. But Jesus is a different kind of shepherd. Jesus cannot bear to lose even one. He loves his sheep even more than he loves his very own life. Can we really fathom that kind of love? A love that is greater than life itself. Jesus loves us, even though, just like sheep, we can be ornery and stubborn. We can be anxious. We can get confused. Jesus loves us even when we wander away and we get lost. We gravitate toward trouble, don't we? And sometimes we find ourselves in danger, sometimes grave danger. But Jesus loves us more than he loves his own life and will always come after us. Jesus was willing to lay down his life for us. He died so that we need not fear death. Jesus is the shepherd we can trust, the one to build a relationship with, the one who already has a firm relationship with us. We strive to recognize his voice so that we might run to him and not run away. And Jesus is that shepherd who, when we come running, will take us up in his arms and hold us close to his chest and whisper words of encouragement and comfort, promising to never let us go. There's a poem written by Joyce Rupp, a Catholic sister, entitled The Lost Lamb, and I want to share that this morning. So much in me gets lost, God. I run off in other directions and lose my vision of you and your kingdom. I lose sight of my hopes. I forget all your promises. I get lost in problems and I run around in selfishness. There you are before me, waiting, calling. There you are behind me, following, pursuing. There you are beside me, caring, loving. What is it you've placed in this sheep's heart of mine? What is it that keeps me bonded to you? In spite of all my arrogance, in spite of all my independence, I feel a new surge today, a revisioning of hope. I feel as if you've lifted me up and are carrying me home, safe and secure on your shoulders, or maybe next to your heart. O God of lost sheep, my God, appeal again and again to all the lostness in me. Pursue me relentlessly. Carry me home. Oh, carry me home.